Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of your background, and there's some fun stories I think we'll find along the way. These are just some examples for those in the audience of some of the things that Greg has done over the years. So he has a very fun, storied past. But let's actually begin. You started your career playing basketball in Athens before playing at UConn. Most business people here today, came up through the business world in college or getting a master's degree. You literally came up through the locker room. Tell us a little bit about that and how that shapes your perspective.
Well, my owner of the Suns came in to see me last week, and UConn beat Michigan State where he played, and so I talked some smack, and he's like, well, big whoop, like you played football there, and I said, no, I played basketball, and I said I used to be a shooting guard, now I'm a pulling guard, so but no, I played in college for a very famous coach, Jim Calhoun. And I would to this day say that I probably learned more from Coach Calhoun than I learned from, I had a very ambitious schedule, so I had a triple major, and not anything really significant. I was like history, poli-sci, and communications, but I learned more from Coach than anybody anybody I studied from, and so having the chance to then go overseas and play. I told my boys, who all were basketball players, my youngest is playing in college, and I said, if you can get to the point where someone pays you to play something, like that is the best career track you could take. So my older guy tried. He went overseas for a year and tried to play and didn't last. But at least he had a good year over there. But yeah, getting paid to play was an incredible way to start a career.
So when you came back from Greece, you transitioned out of playing. As you kind of came to the business side of things, who were some of the people that took a chance on you? Here's a kid that had played sports, not necessarily had business experience, and you started to get into the marketing world, the brand world. Tell us about maybe anyone that helped in that transition.
I think the first person that helped me was the athletic director at UConn, because I had played 3 years and then I ruptured a disc in my back and I needed surgery, and my goal was I got to go rehab and get back because I got to go play for money, and that's like I said, the best job ever. And I was struggling to get healthy enough, and Lou Perkins was the AD at UConn, and he called me in his office and he said, do you think you're going to get back this year? And I said, I don't know, like I'm struggling with back spasms, et cetera. And he goes, then why don't you just work here? And I said, as what? And he said, you'd be a great fundraiser, and just go out, tell people stories. And I also played 1 year of baseball at UConn, so like I had this eclectic background of playing Division I and II sports. And so he's like, you were a fan favorite, everyone likes you, just go out, tell them stories, and then at the end ask them for money. And I'm like, oh, I can do that. And so
and you're still doing it today.
I'm still doing it today. As Lou would know, 30 plus years later, I'm still telling stories and asking for money. So,
yeah. So you transitioned into co-founding SME branding.
Yep.
You maybe have done more rebranding assignments, about 1,500, than anyone else in sports.
Yeah.
That's
including your Utah Jazz.
Including the Utah Jazz.
Yeah.
What did you learn about brand identity at scale, and how does that guide how you still think today?
I mean, honestly, I got into branding by accident. I was working at UConn, and the athletic director from St. John's had gotten hired to be the athletic director at a school called SUNY Stony Brook, which was a massive research institution, 30,000+ students, very similar to UConn. But they had chosen, when they formed the school in the 50s, to play Division III sports. They said, we're going to stay focused on academics. What they miscalculated, the board of the State University of New York system, was that sports is, in many instances, the front door to recruiting students. You see, obviously, big schools like Duke and North Carolina and Alabama and Penn State. Sports is such a critical dynamic of the culture. And so they hired this guy, Dick Laskowski, to come out and be the athletic director. And he called Lou Perkins and says, I need somebody who's young, hungry, talented, and will work for basically nothing. And so
Your name came up.
So my name came up. And so I went down there as the fancy title. I was the Senior Associate AD for External Affairs, which meant that I just went out and told stories and asked people for money. Fancy way to say it. But when I got down there, what I realized within a week was there was a very successful high school in town that Stony Brook was in called Ward Melville High School. And they were nicknamed the Patriots, which was the same as Stony Brook. And every time somebody talked about the Patriots, they were talking about the high school, not the 35,000 student institution around the corner. And I'm like, well, that's a problem, because if the local high school at UConn was named Huskies, and when you talked about the Huskies, it was never about UConn, there'd be a branding issue. And so it didn't take a rocket science to figure out that I needed to change the name. So I went to the university president and said, I need to change this name to something else. And he's like, you can do whatever you want if it's going to generate revenue, as long as you involve a committee of people representative of the entire university. And so I put this huge committee together, and one of the members of the committee, his brother was a branding expert who had designed most of Colgate-Palmolive's toothpastes, toothbrush packaging, their shampoos and all these different things. But Ed was a sports fan, and so he introduced me to Ed, and Ed's like, hey, I can do this for you. Like, I have the classical brand strategy background, and I can actually help you build your brand strategy. And so I paid him literally nothing, and he wrote the brand strategy, and we ended up switching the name from Patriots to Seawolves, and we developed this incredibly great identity system. And that led to the collegiate licensing company coming to me saying, hey, we want to represent you. And I'm like, you realize I've not sold one piece of merchandise, like, ever. And so representing, he's like, no, but you're doing something nobody's done. You're kind of minor league baseball-esque. Nobody knows these minor league teams, but they're buying merchandise like crazy because they like the identities. And so I ended up getting represented by those guys, and they used me, which I didn't realize at first, as basically a business development person for them to talk to all the ADs in the country about switching their logos and how I did it and how much it cost and who I worked with and all that kind of stuff. And when I realized what was happening after 30 or 40 of those, I called Ed and I said, hey, we should do this full time. And so I remember calling my parents, telling them I was going to launch a branding studio, and my mother was like, what do you know about burning cows? And I'm like, no, different branding, Mom. I'm not no fire. And we launched this little studio, and within 12 months we had 100 clients. Like, colleges, we started racking up colleges. The league started to pay attention. Next thing you know, when all the teams were either expansion teams, like the Raptors and so forth, teams that had old, tired identities, teams that moved, like from New Orleans to Utah, how do we freshen that up and make it more relevant to the city? And so over the course of the next 6-7 years, we did about 1,500 branding programs, from Tiger Woods to some of the biggest sports clubs in the world, to dozens and dozens of pro teams, leagues, colleges, athletes, et cetera. We used to have a joke that when Staples came out with the "We have that" button, we had the "I did that" button. So like, you would see an identity, and we would be like, well, we did that one. So it was a pretty cool run that was completely unexpected, completely not planned for, and what it taught me, though, was that the brand was at the center of everything. Like, the DNA of the organization had to be defined, had to be leaned into, had to be developed, because if you want to be a great salesperson, like, you have to know how to storytell around the DNA of what you're representing. And so it was a fun run. We sold the company in '99 to a guy named David Falk, who was Michael Jordan's agent. And David turned around and sold the company to Clear Channel, and Clear Channel then started. They rebranded it with a company called Live Nation, which was music based. And so we ended up getting bought out from that after a year. So we sold it, and a year later they paid me 4 years of salary and said, you can go home now. And I said, can I give you $1 back to get my IP back? And we took it back, and we leveraged that into building yet another consulting company. So
Well, so these experiences, in the 90s then led you to the NBA. And, you get a call from David Stern, and you're suddenly the CMO of the NBA, one of the most powerful, iconic brands in the world, particularly in sports. What did you see about that brand that others weren't seeing yet? What did that feel like, and why did he call you?
So we had done, before David called me, we had probably worked with probably half of the NBA, probably about 15 teams, in some way, shape, or form. The Detroit Pistons was a complete brand overhaul because they had shifted from kind of their bad boy branding to they had like a teal and fuchsia horse head that was on fire. And I remember talking to Tom Wilson, and he's like, who was the CEO of the team at the time, and he said, "What do you think of?" I said, "You couldn't try to be more off-brand if you guys created a strategy and said, how do we spoof ourselves and create a brand that has no relevance to a market?" And he's like, "Oh my God!" And so he hired us, and 2 years later, Tom won Brand Week's Brand Marketer of the Year. And he sent me a replica. They won the title that year, and he sent me a replica NBA Finals trophy,
cool.
which was awesome. I had it in my office until one of my kids knocked it over, and the ball fell off, and it's like, oh, that's my
like
trophy.
any good achievement in life.
Any good achievement. So, I think what David saw was he had a marketer in me that also had basketball sensibility. And his struggle, he was trying to find a CMO for a long time, and he would find these great, more talented than me CMOs, but that when he started talking about the game, or he started talking about kind of how it all works and how fluid it is, and when you think about it, it's a set of brands that in many instances fluctuate with the wins and losses of the team, and so there's so much variability in where you stand, and so you have to have the fluidity or agility to kind of figure out how to do it. And so when I started talking to David about the role, he asked me, he goes, he said, "Well, how do you see things? If you're going to come here?" And I knew he was notoriously, and he always his favorite quote was that micromanagement was underrated, because David liked to have his fingers in every single thing.
Micromanagement was underrated.
But he asked me, in our last interview, he said, "So what do you see here?" And I said, with all due respect, because I know you've been the steward of this brand, you're the main person on the Mount Rushmore of sports industry people, but I think you've paid more attention to the shoebox than the shoe. And he was like, "What the F does that mean?" And I said, "I think where you've gotten with this league is you're more about celebrities and culture and music and rappers and actors, and you're not thinking about it like the players, the teams, the rivalries, the speed, the glory, the power."
Yeah.
And he was like, and I said, "We pay more attention to having Jamie Foxx and Drake sit half court than we do about what Bill Russell meant to this game." And we have to reverse that. I said, I buy a lot of shoes, sneakers, shoes. I always throw the shoebox out because I don't have room in my closet. And so it's more meaningless than the actual product that I love. And so he said, "Well, how do you do that?" And I said, "You start thinking about what's the vision and the values and frankly, what's the mission of the league?" And he looked at me kind of with this incredulous look, and he said, "The mission is to be the best sports league in the world." And I said, "Not a good mission." And he's like, "Are you seriously telling me I don't have a good mission and you want to be hired by me?" And I said, "Well, I want to be hired by you, but I only want to work for you if you have some kind of flexibility in how you think." And he said, "What do you mean it's not a good mission?" I said, "You can't achieve it." And he goes, "What do you mean I can't achieve it?" I said, "Tell me how you become the best sports league in the world. What's the measurement? Yeah. Is it more fans? You're not going to beat Premier League. Is it more money? You're not going to beat the NFL. Start giving me some KPIs how you're going to be the best sports league in the world." And he couldn't. So I said, "So David, you've had a mission that you probably don't articulate to your staff. Therefore, you've had a staff who's functioning for years without a mission. They're not coming to work every day going, 'This is what we're trying to do.'" And so he said, well, what do you think the mission should be? And I said, I think it should be something achievable, something that we can strive for every day and come in. And I said, but I can't tell you off the cuff. You have to hire me first. And so he did. And
it's a good way to get hired.
Good way to get hired. You blackmail the CEO. And he hired me, and we set on a journey over the next couple months of kind of defining kind of the core tenets of what the NBA stood for. And at the end of the day, what the mission was defined as was two things: was we want to be the keepers of the game. We want to be the ones who celebrate, defend, honor, cherish, grow the game. More than Eurobasket, more than China, but something we could come and measure. We could figure out KPIs to each one of those things: participation, viewership, all these different pieces. And then we also said we want to be the most socially responsible league in the world. And so we launched something called NBA Cares, where we could measure, like, how much money were we raising, how many of our players, percentage-wise, are doing things off the court. And they had not paid attention to those things. And the year I got there, 290 players had gone on overseas trips to less advantaged places than the United States to do clinics and camps. And I said, David, more than half of your workforce literally goes and does charity work in foreign countries, and no one talks about it.
That's so cool.
No one measures it. No one celebrates it. Like, this is, like, everyone has this player perception issue that the NBA guys are a bunch of thugs because...
But they're great guys.
But they're great guys, and they care, and they do more than almost every company in the world do in terms of the percentage of people that are actually participating in these things. And so we started shifting the brand. We created a campaign called Where Amazing Happens, where it used to be NBA's fantastic, and it was about all these fans like Penny Marshall and all these people who were like, we love the NBA. Jamie Foxx loves the NBA. Great, Jamie. I don't care. Like, what I care about is that we position this brand effectively so everyone can participate, everyone can be a part of it. And so we did. It was an incredibly successful campaign. NBA Cares revolutionized the league in some ways, shapes, and forms. It didn't come without friction. I had Mark Tatum, who's the deputy commissioner now, one of my best friends. I killed an ad campaign he was running with Gatorade because the ad campaign had the devil over, an angel over one shoulder and the devil over another. And so when it ran through kind of our review, our brand review process, I killed it. And Mark called me up and he said, do you know how much money they spend with us? And I said, Mark, I don't care. They could quadruple what they spend. We can't have the devil next to the NBA logo. We just can't do that. Like, I don't care how kitschy and funny it is. And so he set me up. He's like, well, then you're telling Gatorade. And so I met with the executives of Gatorade, and I challenged them with, this is our brand positioning. Go back in the shop and figure out, like, what you have to do to celebrate our brand positioning. But we're paying you. I don't care. Don't pay me then. I'll go to somebody else. And they came out with the campaign originally where the players were working so hard they started sweating Gatorade colors, which won them ad awards, like, all over the place. But it also supported my positioning that this was about the players, the effort, the glory, the speed, the power, the beauty, the rivalries, all these different things. And when we started having a collective of companies tell the same story and sing off the same sheet of music, the league had unprecedented growth. And so it was fun. I got yelled at every day because he was a legendary screamer. So, and one day I told him, I said, hey, David, with all due respect, I probably am the most trained person ever to work for you. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I played college basketball for Jim Calhoun, who taught me more curse words than like any of my friends could ever do from the gutter. And so I am ready for you. You can throw it at me. And he told me he didn't give a F about Jim Calhoun or my crappy career and all these other, and he kicked me out of his office. But I knew he loved me. So.
Okay, so you had an amazing run at the NBA, and then you go to, MSG, Madison Square Gardens. Tell us about that. About that kind of shift of leadership and, some of the demands and pressures that you experienced there that were different from other parts of your career.
In some ways, it was very like coming home because I'd worked with so many teams, so I understood how teams function. I knew where the gaps were. I knew where the opportunities to lean in were. But in some ways, it was totally different. You're going from trying to build a global brand on the marketing end of the fence to I went there as the chief revenue officer. So I'd done like this 180 of like, hey, I'm the marketing guy, And now I've got to go make all this money, or else this owner who has a spotted reputation might, the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater in that place. And so it was really trying to go in there. And what I learned about that experience was structure matters, systems matter, process matters. I got there, and they had, over the years, they had very powerful leaders in different parts of the org. And so the Knicks had their own team, and the Rangers had their own team, and the Garden had their own team, and Radio City Music Hall had their own team. And frankly, they were competing with each other more than they were competing with the Yankees or the Giants or the Mets or anybody else. And so when I got there, I recommended to Mr. Dolan that we consolidate all sales, and we centralize it, and we build a portfolio selling operation, which he agreed with. And so we went through the pain of kind of reorging the entire company.
Yeah.
We had just gone public at $18 a share. Following the reorg, in 1 year, our stock went from 18 to 57, and then ultimately went all the way up to $250 a share.
Wow.
So there was a real power. And now the key there was I started cross-comping people, where everyone had their own territories. I'm like, hey, if you help that person hit their numbers, I'll pay you a bonus too. And if you help that person hit their number, I'll pay you a bonus. What do you mean? I don't have to sell any media? No, you have to sell sponsorships. You have to help them sell media. And if they hit their number, I'll give you all a spiff.
Wow.
And once everyone started to, and I had to beg.
They weren't fierce competitors anymore.
They weren't. We went from fierce competitor within our own company to people singing Kumbaya and trying to find ways, because we had probably 5 different revenue functions that I was responsible for. And so getting them all on the same page where they were all rowing together was, I realized it wasn't going to be about some motivational speeches. It wasn't going to be about, great architectural design of infrastructure. It was going to be about money. I'll pay you more if you help them, and vice versa. And so I had to lean into Mr. Dolan to get a bigger pool of comp so I could actually do that. But the 5-year plan just kept getting torn up and redone because we had people singing off the same sheet.
So many of us have all been to Madison Square Garden for a variety of things, whether it's a concert, a hockey game, basketball. Give us just one moment from your MSG years, a deal, a night, a conversation that kind of captures what it's like to operate inside, such a large organization.
So I'll give you a couple.
Okay.
One was, I'm a college basketball player. I grew up in New York. St. John's was my favorite team. The Knicks, I still, underneath my son's T-shirt is a Knicks T-shirt.
We'll keep that here.
I saw your friend wearing the Yankee hat, and I just wanted to hug him. So I get there, and Calhoun tells me, I don't know if I started, but I played a lot of minutes. And we were playing St. John's, and they had a guy named Mark Jackson, who you may recognize the name, Hall of Fame point guard. Mark was an All-American, all-everything, and I was starting opposite Mark Jackson. So I'm like, all right, I got this. Mark Jackson proceeded to score 29 points, have 9 rebounds and 9 assists.
Great game.
I went 1 for 9 from the floor. I scored 4 points. It was the best 1 for 9 effort ever. I felt so great. I just couldn't get a shot to go down. But at the end of the game, Jackson barreled down the lane, and I took a charge. And the charge was on the front cover of the New York Post. And it was with a caption saying, UConn's Greg Economou takes a charge. One of the rare mistakes Mark Jackson made all night. And so I got 7,000 copies of the New York Post and just told people, don't look at the box score. Just don't look at the box score. But I think for me, going back to work there, I think the first game working there was pretty magical. Yeah. Just that building to me is, they call it the world's most famous for a reason.
Yeah.
I think, there were so many incredible moments. We weren't that good. The Knicks weren't that good. The Rangers were actually very good when I was there. But it was just being in the building, being amongst my friends that I grew up with, being, kind of in an environment where, anything was possible. I was traveling all over the world because we had created a positioning that the Garden and New York was the gateway to the rest of the U.S. And so if you're a Chinese company or you're a Russian company, back then pre all this, kind of geopolitical stuff, we were all over the place attracting these companies to come through our gateway. And anything was possible. I was there when Linsanity happened, which was probably one of the greatest. I mean, it was 3 weeks. It felt like we were in Game 7 for 3 weeks. I mean, it was just, you can't even describe what it was like. You know, the secondary tickets in the upper bowl were going for $8,000 for a game. You know, it was like,
wow,
are you kidding me? And so it was an incredible place to work. You know, I've worked in different places, but to work for your hometown team, there was something really magical about that.
So before I ask kind of next questions, I want to just share a little clip that your team had sent. And this is interesting.
I have not seen this, so somebody's getting fired maybe.
No. But it's interesting, you know, so you started as an athlete, you got, and, you know, were in sports, and that was kind of consistent over those next several years and decade plus in your career. And then you did something different, and I want to kind of share this clip real quick. Oh, let me go back, sorry.
Wow, this is unbelievable. I've had a hell of a year, and to be put in that category with some of my friends, plus my man, was unbelievable enough. Just want to say a massive thank you to everyone at Capitol Records, Steve, Ash, Ambrosia, Greg, Robbie, Mitra, my management who have been with me since I was 16 years old, incredible people, and the fans. You guys are unbelievable. Every single time you turn out for these things, this is for you. Thank you very much.
So I want to ask about that night, but you made a deliberate move into entertainment, into content. Guggenheim Media, Dick Clark Productions, you built a branded content practice that does over $250 million in deals just over 4 years. You walked into Hollywood with a sports background, though. How did that world receive you? What was that reception like?
No one knew who I was. So a lot of cold shoulders. No, it was, so my boss who hired me away from the Garden was a guy named Todd Bowley. Todd had just bought the Dodgers, Dick Clark Productions, Billboard, and a bunch of other complex and all these different kind of entertainment groups, music in Hollywood. And so he offered me the chief commercial officer position. I wanted to move to LA for personal reasons. My whole family had settled in Tucson, Arizona, and I wanted to be closer to everyone. And you know, what I realized right away was they were leaving so much money on the table in that they weren't taking advantage of the fact that the most famous people in the world were walking through their events, specifically Golden Globes and American Music Awards, Billboard Music Awards. You had the top talent in the whole world. You had social followings up to the billions, and they weren't making a nickel on it. And so I said to them, we should come in here and build a branded content studio. And my boss said, what's that? And I said, it's a way for us to do some organic stuff and just attach brands to it. And what it grew into was we started doing a lot of contextual stuff. So like you guys saw the T-Mobile in the background. We did a deal with T-Mobile that was $20 million. What they got was they came in and they took over the show for a stretch of the show. And we actually had Justin Bieber, we got him a little bit of money, and Justin played 3 songs to end the show. And they basically owned it. And it was above and beyond what the TV rights were, because that's how they made their money all along, was TV rights. I started making as much money on branded content for those shows as they were making in TV rights.
Wow. And
so the EBITDA of the company just skyrocketed through the roof. And so, you know, so it was a super interesting experience. I think it was early days branded content, so we had a lot of folks asking us, and if I would have been smart, I would have probably started a consultancy and gone around and made more money than I probably made there by teaching other people how to do that kind of stuff. But we took advantage of the fact that we had all these incredibly famous people and incredibly successful social media people, and we figured out how to leverage their followings for our own gain and for theirs. You know, we were building mousetraps that were celebrating them and giving them more reasons to retweet or or what have you. And so it was a really cool experience. But it also got me into the storytelling game. And so what I tell people, if there's a common thread to my career, it's been basically 3 things. relationship building. Like, how do you just have, because you never know. Like, when the guy who actually called me about the job at Guggenheim was a guy named Peter Guber. And so Peter is a part owner of the Warriors, but he also has won a couple Oscars. So he's the only person in the history of the world that's won an NBA title and a World Series championship and some Oscars.
Crazy.
Right? And so he called me and said, I have this really cool opportunity for you. Now, I helped Peter 20 years earlier when he was, his sports interest was minor league baseball. And I was doing branding, and so I branded some of his minor league baseball teams. And I just kept a relationship with him. I'm like, oh, that guy, I really liked him. Like, he does some movie stuff too, and then he wins the Oscar, and he wins another Oscar, and then he gets really rich, and he buys into the Dodgers and to the Warriors and stuff. And so, like, the ability to lean into the relationships, number one. And then number two, storytelling is everything, right? And whether that's storytelling when you're out pitching somebody or whether you're trying to position your brand. And the thread is, like, when I was building brands, like, what we really were doing was we were creating the story of what that brand stood for, what the DNA of that brand was. And then the manifestation was logos, uniforms, signs. You know, the manifestation later was more moving pictures, video, and other things. But that common bond. And then the third thing in what I've seen has been a commonality is data. You know, it's like, how do I manage my data the most effective? And that started with, I was young, I read this book called The Power of Who. It was life-altering read, which talked about, basically, the author, Bob Bodine, who's become one of my best friends, in the book says, you already know everybody you need to know. It's just how do you go back through those people and multiply and grow? And so I actually changed my entire Rolodex, and I coded it. And I said, these are people in my inner circle, I'm going to talk to them every day. These are people in my next circle, and I'm going to talk to them once a week. And so I developed a communication schedule where,
Very intentional,
It was
deliberate.
very intentional, and it was about data and relationship building, putting those two things together. And then hopefully when I got them, whether it was on the phone or via email, I could storytell and kind of keep them excited about the things I was working on. So, so for me, that was a common bond that just found other ways to come out, like the storytelling part of it.
So before we shift from Hollywood and entertainment, you launched Game One with Basil Iwanek, the producer behind John Wick franchise, and Michael Smith from ESPN. So that's a collision of sports, culture, Hollywood IP. Give us just one project from that era that still makes you proud.
So Basil had produced John Wick, Sicario, The Town. I mean, the guy, he's done Greenland 2. The guy has 50 major films. Probably the most successful independent film producer out there. He was my neighbor in LA. And he had 3 sons, I had 3 sons. He liked the Mets, I liked the Yankees. He grew up in New Jersey, I grew up in New York. He liked the Jets, I liked the Giants. So we liked to get together and just make fun of each other all the time. And one day he came to me and he said, hey, I have a script that I need your help on. And I was like, dude, like what possible help can I give you? Sure. Like, you make famous movies and I'm like asking people to buy signs and ads. And he said, no, I have a script that is about the UFC. And I've gotten this woman named Halle Berry to play the lead role, and she's going to direct it. And she's going to play a UFC fighter who falls down on her luck and, kind of taking the Creed or Rocky kind of thematic, but bringing it into UFC. And he's like, I don't know what to do about the UFC. I don't know anybody there. And so I called my friend who was the chief commercial officer and said, Mikey, how would it work with you guys? I got one of my buddies lives down the street from me. He produces all these big movies, like blah, blah, blah. And he's like, let me talk to Dana. The next day, I get a phone call from a 702 number, and it's Dana White. And he says, hey, I hear you're making a movie about the UFC. And I said, oh, no, I'm not making any movies. My friend is, and he's a big-time guy. And he's like, can you connect me to him? And so we did a conference call. It was like pre-COVID, so it was pre-Zoom phenomena. And we did a conference call, and Dana White basically gave Basil everything for free. He's like, you can use the marks, you can use the gyms, you can use my talent. We had cast Svetlana, who was the champion at the time, to be the villain in the movie. And so we ended up raising about $10 million to film it. as an independent film. We sold it to Netflix for 21, so it was a economic success as well.
Yeah.
And you know, Basil said to me, he's like, hey, you're one of the producers on this movie. And I said, I didn't do anything. Like, what do you mean I'm a producer on a movie? And he said, well, it wouldn't have happened without Dana White coming in, and like it would have taken us too long, and I would have lost Hallie because she would have gone and do another project. And so from that experience, not only did I get into the producer game, my kids ask me, Dad, are you a movie producer now? I'm like, I guess. Like, I don't know. But we started a little studio called Game One, and we produced a handful of films and documentaries, and I subsequently sold my stake to Basil because he needed to consolidate his other studio because he was in an acquisition phase, and he couldn't be in two places at once, according to his buyers. So I sold him my stake. I retained ownership over a bunch of projects. And then I continue to produce outside of, it's kind of my side hustle. So I just released a show with a little company called Skydance and another company called Religion of Sports, who has an investor named Tom Brady. And there's a show on AMC and AMC Plus called The Rise of the 49ers that was, you know, what's great about kind of that storytelling is it came out of my brain.
That's
you know,
cool.
It was like Bill, like student of sports, and I was like, Bill Walsh was the Steve Jobs of sports.
Yeah.
Like he saw the world differently. He delivered the same product, but in a better way than anyone had ever done, like Jobs did with personal computing or phones. And Walsh did that with the West Coast offense. And so when I reached out to 49ers, they were like, we'd love to do that. And when I reached out to the Walsh family, they're like, we'd love to do that.
Wow.
And not only did they love to do it, they had about 1,000 hours worth of footage of Bill Walsh inventing the West Coast offense on chalkboards.
Wow.
So when you watch the series, it's a 4-part series, you see a lot of Walsh drawing on chalkboards, and the next clip is Joe Montana throwing to Jerry Rice for a touchdown. And it's like directly how he envisioned
That's cool.
it. And so that one I did on my own. I just conceived it. I wrote it. I sent it to the guys at Skydance owns NFL Films, so I had to go through them. They loved it. They took it out once my part was done, they went and did the rest of it. But it's been the #1 performing show on AMC since The Walking Dead. So
You've heard it.
So
Rise of the 49ers.
Rise
we
of
all
the
need,
49ers.
we all have something to watch tonight.
Rise of the 49ers.
That's awesome.
Bring your Kleenex. It gets very emotional. So, no, it doesn't. But it was fun. And Tom Brady, I didn't meet him in the process, like, because I finished my part, and then they brought Religion of Sports in. But my wife was like, you have to post on LinkedIn that you and Tom Brady produced a show together. And I'm like, that's not exactly true. She's like, it's 100% true. Look at the credits. It's Tom Brady and Greg Economou. I'm like, yeah, but I never met him. Like it wasn't like we collaborated. She's like, just post something that's kind of like that. And so, we took a little bit of liberties.
Yeah.
So.
Well, oh, that's amazing. Well, I want to shift gears for a moment now. This next kind of visual is you when you were at Ticketmaster. So you got back into sports through Ticketmaster. And tell us a little bit about that. You were starting to realize that a ticket wasn't just a transaction. It's the beginning of a data relationship. You've already talked a little bit about data, but what did you see that maybe everyone else was missing in that transaction and in that kind of sports arena?
What I saw was, so Ticketmaster is effectively two different companies. It's a marketplace, like an Amazon, where you buy tickets, like concert tickets, show tickets, game tickets, what have you. On the other hand, it's a SaaS software business. And so most of the teams in sports, their software is, the underbelly is Ticketmaster software. And so you might be buying something on Suns.com, but the process is driven by Ticketmaster.
Ticketmaster, yeah.
And so what I realized when I got in there was, and from my history at teams, is that teams are relatively unsophisticated when it comes to data management, mining, et cetera. And the reason is they just don't have big enough budgets to hire data specialists. So we have, I think, one data scientist on the Sun staff. But when I got to Ticketmaster as the chief commercial officer, I had 25 or 30. And so I could look at our first party data all day long with our CMO and figure out, can I drive more sales in a particular market? But what was more valuable for me, because my relationships with the teams, was can I help the Phoenix Suns or the New York Yankees or the Miami Heat sell more tickets, whether that be season tickets, renewing their existing season tickets, or single game tickets. Could I actually deploy or leverage that data? And so I had this kind of cockamamie me idea that I was going to build a media tool that would basically look at first-party data, segment it, and then we develop custom creative per the segment, and we press the button and we run these campaigns. And so they gave me some purview to go do that. I took any refugee I could find at Ticketmaster that was like bored in their job or had more to give and said, do you want to work on this cool thing? And we put a collection of people together. And lo and behold, we did it with the Yankees as our beta test partner. And the Yankees were spending about $2 million a year in local media to sell single game tickets. And they gave us, I think the first tranche of money was like 50 grand. And our 50 grand, the ROAS on that 50 grand was so much higher than their local agency, they gave us 200 more grand. And it was so much higher than the local agency, they gave us $1 million. And before we knew it, we had over 6 or 8 months, we had taken almost their entire performance budget. And I took that case study and I went out to sports, and we ended up probably doing, within that first 12 to 18 months, we probably had 60, 70 teams that were buying performance media through the channel. And then I had to go hire a bunch of people, real professional people like your team, and kind of recreate almost like an agency inside of Ticketmaster. And the thesis around it was, I need a differentiator to compete with SeatGeek and Axis, because those guys are paying more than I'm willing to pay for accounts because they just want to buy their way to success. And I don't want to turn us upside down. So the only way I can compete with them is I have to deliver something different and special that they can't. And I could uniquely do that because I had such a history and I had so much data and my teams had so much data that I could create kind of data strategies and therefore media strategies much more effectively than they could have, because they were both young companies. And it helped us retain every customer we had. And it was a really significant new revenue line that we didn't have before, and which I would have gone without if I retained all the customers I had. And I learned a lot. Like, I learned a lot about working in a historic company that was 45 years old, and you had this guy coming in trying to change everything. And how I tell people that segment of my career I would title the Game of Thrones years, because it was like literally every meeting I went into was like everyone was trying to shoot everything down, like everything. And I was like, guys, we're renewing because they're, it was like, well, that's not what we do here. And so it was super interesting to succeed at something against an incredible currents in our face, right?
So, you had already done a lot in sports and had interacted with a lot of teams and a lot of leagues, but particularly at Ticketmaster, I mean, it was pretty much every team, every league, all entertainment, kind of all roads somewhat lead through Ticketmaster. What did you learn in that seat, and what did, as you look at the various leagues, any kind of aha moments that came along the way?
Couple things. That teams still couldn't position their brand effectively, therefore storytell effectively. They could not manage data effectively, and teams struggled to sell the single game ticket. Like, it's even a team like us, like we have 207 straight sellouts, but we don't sell all tickets to season ticket holders intentionally, because if you have every ticket in your building as a season ticket holder, right, and then you have a bad season and a bunch of people choose not to renew, you're scratching and clawing. So you want to we only sell out of 17,000 seats, about 11,000 season tickets. And so the rest is some group tickets, but a lot of it's single game tickets. And we want to keep that fresh, kind of group of folks coming in. And if Phil Case comes 14 times, we might go to you and try to sell you a season ticket. But we want to keep the currents going on that regard. But teams struggle. They struggle to get to it, and to get to the end of the rainbow. So putting that together, and then therefore, they're not optimizing. And then the other thing I learned, which is what I'm sure we'll talk about next, is teams weren't leveraging their data on behalf of their other partners. I sit in a market with a relatively modest database of 4 million records, but relatively modest in a city of 5 million people. And so, I between the first party data I have and my ability to create look-alike campaigns, like I could pretty much touch everyone in my state, my city and my state. And that's great for me to sell single game tickets, which we're doing effectively with Ticketmaster's help now. But we're not helping the rest of our partners. And so it's like we're leaving a lot on the table by not going to them saying, look, let us leverage our first party data on your behalf.
Yeah.
Which I tried to do at Ticketmaster, but my boss kept saying, who was a ticketing guy, he kept saying, it's too far afield, like we're not a sponsorship company. And I would tell him, we're a data company, Jared. Like we're a data company. We should be called Data Masters, not Ticketmasters. like we have what everyone cherishes. And if they would have been smart, they would have a retail media network that was, that was
Amazing.
bigger, better, and more amazing. And the fact that they just couldn't get out of, I tell people, like I went to work for the Maytag company, and they would install software, and the only time you'd ever see anybody from Ticketmaster is if the software broke. So you buy a dishwasher, you never talk to Maytag again until it doesn't work. And then you call them and you're like, get it to my house. I hate washing things by hand. And they run out and they fix it and you're like, thanks. And maybe you'll never see them again. So I wanted to build something that was much more proactive, that got me in front of customers and was helping them move their products, which were tickets in that case. I would have liked to help them move their sponsorship products more, but the powers that be there said, that it's just too far afield. And I said, huge mistake. And so.
So fast forward to the present. You're in Phoenix, great location for you and your family.
Yeah.
And with Matt Ishbia, the billionaire owner of Player 15 Group, he has a couple of entities, properties, and businesses that he owns there. Tell us about what you're building there, what you're excited about, and what that looks like in 5 years.
So Matt took over his father's mortgage business. It was 12 people, and independent mortgage broker who wrote mortgages for, people in Detroit that didn't want to go to the bank. And he started having a epiphany that he could build something that was more of a wholesale business, that he could find all the independent mortgage brokers in Michigan, and he could develop best practices and eventually software that would help them do their jobs better. Fast forward 15 years, Matt has basically become the best tech company in the mortgage business. And so he services the B2B world, not the B2C world, like Rocket Mortgage,
that's B2C.
You go to Rocket or you go to your bank, where Matt's whole drive is go to a local broker, because brokers can get your loan done faster, cheaper, and probably you'll create more savings in it, which I don't understand that business enough to talk to it. But what I saw in Matt was this ingenious guy that figured out he could create technology solutions to change an industry, which was an old-fashioned, fill out the form, let me make some calls, let me source some dollars, to, hey, I've got ways to do this super quickly, super effectively. Matt has 10,000 employees now, so in 14 years he's gone from 12 to 10,000. About 3,500 of those people are tech people, so he's literally built a tech company. So what I realized in Matt was that he had experience and vision and propensity to look at technology as a solution. And when he was talking to me about the job, I frankly told him, I said, look, if you're looking for somebody to sell, don't hire me. I will sell, and I'll hit numbers. That's what we do. But if that's all my job description is, then no thank you, because I'll go do something else.
Yeah.
But what Matt wanted was, he wanted to kind of reinvent the sports landscape. And so when I started talking to him about things like Adrenaline 360, which we'll get into in a second, and the B2B Alliance product, and kind of building an internal studio product that we could produce our own shows at scale, but also produce for other people at scale, he greenlit that for me. And we've sold, when I got there, we were 9th in the NBA in sales, and now we're 3rd. Wow. And some of that's predicated on just having more structure, systems, processes, and recruiting some really great people and running a really tight operation. But some of it's because we're building some bells and whistles that no one else is doing. And so clients are seeing that and going, that's super interesting. Can that help me actually sell more product? It's like, yes. Yeah. Because the sponsorship game has been traditionally an impressions game, and I'm trying to change that. I'm trying to make it more of a KPI game, where it's like, you need to sell more soda? We can help you do that. You want to sell more cars? I can help you do that too. It's just a matter of how do I leverage the data source that I have to be able to get smart about how I route my entire infrastructure and put you know, build a funnel basically and say, now I'm going to take you through this journey and hopefully we're going to have some success at the end.
Well, and I think everyone has been used to the sports investment, funnel. They know they invest, they get IP, they can talk about being a sponsor of, but now you've begun to build in multiple ways the sponsorship ROI funnel.
Yeah.
It's the payoff.
Yeah.
And I think you're doing some things that I know is catching attention from PayPal and Verizon and others around the country, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, what I've learned over many, many years when you talk to CEOs of many different kinds of companies is they effectively need two things. That's it. They need to build their brands, for whatever that means, whether it's in a B2C scenario or a B2B scenario. They need brand equity. They need people to love and respect them. They want to be able to scale and grow and lean on what they've built. And two, they need to make more money.
Mm-hmm. Pretty simple.
Pretty easy. And so when I re-entered this, when I started the sponsorship realm, I brought some of these things to the garden, and I just didn't have the technology parts of it like I do now. And so what I tried to tell people when I was at the garden was, and I used to say this, and it was funny the first few times I said it, I got a lot of really kind of confused looks on people's faces. I said, I want you guys to be more like McKinsey than the Mets. And I had a bunch of sports sellers looking at me like, who's McKinsey? And I was like, it's a consulting company that solves problems for companies. So if that company needs to sell more beer, like we have to think about everything we own and how can I actually help them sell more beer? Like, it's not about telling them they got 1 billion impressions or 100 billion impressions or 100 million impressions. It's about, did you sell more beer this year? Yeah. And if you didn't, then let me go back to the drawing board and try to rethink the mousetrap to try to sell more beer for you. And so we built a lot of that stuff at the garden, which made us eminently successful because people were seeing results. I mean, we ran an email campaign for JP Morgan Chase. Email. We sent it from Knicks to our season ticket bases. And Knicks and Rangers. We did $300 million in checking account deposits off an email campaign.
That's got to feel good.
And Chase was like, we just paid for our entire sponsorship. And I said, yes, but when you're up for renewal, I'm going to come to you for double.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and then my task is to now raise my game so I can pay for it again. And so I think what I learned in that time is how can you speak the same language as your client, which no one in sponsorship does. Right. Like they sit there and go, we're going to do this and you're going to get that and da-da-da-da. And I used this example the other day is I had a partner, a legal partner that spends a lot of money in local media. And she had very, very sophisticated media buyer, very sophisticated sponsorship person, national buyer. And she looked at me and she said, like, I don't know if we're going to renew because I just don't see the ROI. And I said, look, Maria, the reason you don't see the ROI is we sold you a bowl of spaghetti and meatballs. The problem is we mixed it behind the counter and we put it on in front of you and you can't tell if there's one meatball or 10. And that's not a good way for us to go to market. And she's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. And I said, well, think of it this way. The spaghetti is sponsorship assets and the meatballs media. I'm going to take them apart. I make them separately. And I might make meatballs in a very sophisticated way. I might add a little bacon. I might add prosciutto. I might do some cool things. I might have other meats that I'm putting into the sauce. But I'm making it separate. The spaghetti's the spaghetti. So what you buy in my building, what entitlements you have, what signage you own, what kind of community programming you have, that's the spaghetti. The meatballs are the media. And we need a better strategy to how to manage our meatballs, right? And she goes, I think I know what you're talking about now. And so we built a media plan for her that effectively tripled her current deal because she spends all this money.
Not with you, though.
And my convince to her was, I've kept your deal the same. She's like, what do you mean? Like I went from 1 million to 3 or 4. And I said, no, it's 1 million in sponsorship and it's 1 million in sponsorship again. You're just spending 3 million in media. But you're already spending that, Maria, in this market. I just need a little bit of the 25 million you're spending. Just move some of it over to me. And guess what? This $3 or $4 million deal might turn out to be a $12 million deal if I perform. So I win, you win, right? Because if I'm performing, you're getting more cases. And if you pay me $12 million, I'm going to be walking around being carried on a a chariot with, with my team going, how did you guys revolutionize this thing? And so it's really an effort, number one, like I said at Ticketmaster, it's an effort that if I can help these clients actually perform in business, I'm going to protect them. They'll never leave me. So worst case scenario is I don't perform in the media, but I still maintain $1 million partnership. Great. Like I'm flat. That's fine. Like it's still $1 million I'm putting in the coffer. I don't have to go resell to somebody else. But I'm giving myself the opportunity to scale that business in an incredible way. And thankfully, I have an owner who sees that because that's the business he built.
Right.
It was like, holy crap, technology helps you actually, actually helps you build scale.
So did Maria, did she like the spaghetti and meatballs?
She loved the meatballs.
She loved the meatballs, okay.
And the spaghetti. So we're finalizing that, and we're going to put them back together and put it in front of her, but she'll know what went into making the meatballs and the meat platter, and she'll know what went into making the spaghetti, and then we'll put it together and put a little sauce on top, and
So I know we're out of time. Just, I would say if you had to give advice to a younger self, but you actually have a younger self, and I've met some of your kids.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to your kids today, the Greg Economou of today, whether or not they listen, that's another, but what advice would you give them after, careers that span not only decades, but, eras and industries?
I mean, my son, when he played overseas for a year, and then I took the job at the Suns, and he wanted to live in Arizona too. So he moved there, and he immediately got hired by the Diamondbacks. I think his last name helped him get the job, knowing a dad that had been in the business for 30 plus years. But he ended up being the MVP of the ticket sales group over there.
That's
but
awesome.
on his first day on the job, he grabbed me the night before, and he's like, "Dad, what advice do you have for me?" And I said, "Work harder than everybody else." He's like, "Okay, what else?" I'm like, "Work twice as hard as everybody else." He's like, no, what else? Like, you've been in this 30 years. What can you tell me? What do I need to know? I'm like, show up an hour before everybody else and stay an hour later. You'll win.
Love that.
You'll win. Like, go watch a bunch of Kobe videos. Like, he worked out 4 times a day when everybody else was working out once or twice. And if you listen to, there's a great interview Kobe gave where he talks about people realizing what it actually takes to be great. And he's like, by the time people realize what it takes to be great, I'm so far ahead of them because they can't spend the hours. I've already accrued 10 years worth of hours in building this thing that they might have more talent than me, but they're not gonna outwork
them.
So for my own children, it was whatever you decide to do, just have the pride and the discipline to just outwork everyone, period. Yeah. And like, I'm the oldest person I think at the company in player 15. I still outwork everyone. I'm in first. I try not to leave last because I got remarried and I have a 7-year-old daughter who gives me a lot of gruff if I don't get home for dinner. But it's about not maybe the amount of hours, but it's the intensity that you work and the intention that you work with. And then I think the other advice I would give people, because I give it to my own kids, is the 2 factors that I look for in everybody that works for me, in addition to their own personal values, are courage and my ability to instill hope. And so, like, I want people never to, like, I tell everybody, I will lead the league in dumb ideas. I promise you that. Because I'll be throwing them out at a prodigious rate. And people look at me like, well, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Great. Here's another one. That's even dumber. Okay, great. Here's another one. So, like, have the courage of your convictions, your ideas, to put them out there. And then on the other hand, from my perspective, is I'm always trying to design an org and my relationship with my people where they feel hope every day. And if I can instill hope, and the hope might be in the form of recognition, it might be in the form of more money, more opportunity, higher title, a job outside of our place. How can I continually monitor how much hope I'm instilling in people? And if I can do that, they'll run through the wall for you. And I've done that over many, many years. I learned that fairly early, that if you can get people, that's the key to motivation, because it's the key to motivation as an athlete. Like, if I'm sitting on the bench and I haven't played in a number of games and Calhoun comes over and says, I may start you next week against Boston College. You don't think I had my best 5 practices ever?
Right.
Like, because I had hope that I was going to play in the Boston Garden on national TV.
Yeah.
I started and I played, and it was amazing. And it was like, oh, hope equals effort.
Yeah.
So,
ladies and gentlemen, big thank you to Greg Economou.
My pleasure.